Welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast, where you learn how to extract your business and personal deep wealth. I'm your host, Jeffrey Feldberg. This podcast is brought to you by Deep Wealth and the 90-Day Deep Wealth Experience. When it comes to your business deep wealth, your exit or liquidity event is the most important financial decision of your life. But unfortunately, up to 90% of liquidity events fail. Think about all that time and your hard-earned money wasted. Of the quote-unquote successful liquidity events, most business owners leave 50% to over 100% of the deal value in the buyer's pocket and don't even know it. I should know. I said no to a seven-figure offer and yes to mastering the art and the science of a liquidity event. 2 years later, I said yes to a different buyer with a 9-figure deal. Are you thinking about an exit or liquidity event? Don't become a statistic and make the fatal mistake of believing the skills that built your business are the same ones to sell it. After all, how can you master something you've never done before? Let the 90-Day Deep Wealth Experience and the 9-step roadmap of preparation help you capture the best deal instead of any deal. At the end of this episode, take a moment and hear from business owners like you who went through the Deep Wealth Experience. Bryan Clifton helps founders, families, and next-generation leaders align their vision for success with the life they want to live and the legacy they want to leave. By focusing at the intersection of business and psychology, Bryan equips entrepreneurs, families, and organizations with the tools needed to better navigate uncertainty. Growing up in a family business that ultimately collapsed, Bryan deeply understands the challenges that impact the family and the business. He believes that pursuit of entrepreneurial activities can be a blessing to a family, but it can also lead to its undoing. All of the work he does is motivated by his life goal to see more happy and healthy families. Bryan holds degrees from Pepperdine University and Harding University. He has been named 40 Under 40 by Oklahoma Magazine, Edmund Young Professional of the Year, and Innovator of the Year by Journal Record. He serves as trustee for the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum. In pursuit of education, humanitarian, and religious interests, Bryan spent time in over 45 countries, including extended tours in Greece, Haiti, Guatemala, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. He's been married to his wife Mariah for 7 years and has 2 daughters, Millie and Reese. He lives in Edmond, Oklahoma. Welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast, and we have a fellow entrepreneur, business owner, founder, market disruptor with us. I am so excited for this episode, but I'm going to pause it all there with one question before I formally introduce our guest. So all you business owners, founders, entrepreneurs out there that you're in a family business, or maybe you're a startup and you don't realize it yet, but it will become a next generation family business. How are things going? Because I know when it comes to family business, you're in a league of your own, but some of these family businesses literally transform the world. And we're going to be talking about that, how to do it the better way, and to have strategies that you haven't perhaps heard about or you think aren't even possible. So we'll put a plug on it right there. No more spoiler alerts. Bryan, welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast. An absolute pleasure to have you with us. And I'm curious, Bryan, there's always a story behind the story. What's your story? What got you to where you are today?
Well, Jeffrey, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be on the podcast. I have felt like I have been in business literally my entire life. So I grew up in a family business. And if you've ever seen the fake teeth that make you look like a hillbilly, that was my family's company. So we sold toy and novelty items. Our kind of unofficial tagline for years was, if it's in good taste, we don't carry it. So a lot of remote control fart machines and bullet hole stickers on cars, just gag gift items that every kid thought was hilarious. My mom did not find those as funny most of the time, but we spent a lot of time in the early days of that business at state fairs and Christmas shows and things like that back in the mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And so I've grown up in business literally my entire life. And I always thought that it was normal to be a fifth grader and working on inventory and then doing reconciliations on financials and making sure all the cash lined up and then reordering that product from whatever appropriate distributor it was. And I legitimately thought that was a normal childhood. And so everything that I share today, it gives you a little bit of background of why I am the way I am. It's because my childhood was odd, but it helped shape a lot of the ways in which I think and how I view business and entrepreneurship today.
I love that. I love how just growing up that really sculpted you. You thought that was the norm, as is really the case with so many successful entrepreneurs. But from fake teeth to fart machines, here we are today, Bryan. What a story, what a background, and I'm sure we can go down all kinds of rabbit holes on that. But let me ask you this, for the benefit of our listeners, who, as I mentioned earlier in my little preamble there, who are either in a family business, multi-generational, maybe they're the next generation, maybe they're the next generation that's actually coming up, their transition hasn't happened, or perhaps they're in startup mode and they don't know yet that it will be next generation. We'll plant some seeds with them today. Bryan, what's going on out there that you're tackling this incredibly complex and painful problem, and you're so unique out there, you're making a huge difference? What should we know?
Yeah. So for most businesses, whenever you get started, you don't have a guarantee that it's going to be a family business.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so what I always tell people is do not make the assumption that your business today is going to stay in the family, but the decisions you make today may be closing that door. And so I always like to look at it from a standpoint of some businesses need to have a natural expiration date or a natural closing. They are not meant to be 70-year-old businesses. Some of them might be really good for 10 years. That's what that business needs to do. And so if you want to create a family business, one, you have to look at, am I in an industry that could actually have sustaining power? And just because the answer to that may be no does not mean you're in a bad industry. It just might mean that this industry is on its way out, or there is a certain window of time where it's very applicable, or the size you would have to grow that company to is pretty drastic in order to be able to compete longer term in that horizon. But the way that you structure your business, especially how you interact with capital early on in the days of a business, open and close those doors of could this be a family business? So we haven't even got into the family dynamics, the family skill level, but just the fundamental legal tactical basics of how your business is structured, how you brought in investors or maybe didn't. That all of those kind of ingredients make up the recipe of if a business could even possibly pass down to a future generation down the road.
So, Bryan, you bring up an interesting point, and before we move forward with this, perhaps you can give some insights, some really strategies from the field that work. So, family businesses out there, and I know when we work here at Deep Wealth with various businesses, some of them are family businesses, oftentimes the next generation, a common theme that we hear is, I never really had a choice. It was just assumed I would be running the business, and that's how I was groomed, and that's how I did my education. Those were my expectations. And even if I wanted to do something else, I really had no choice in the matter. That's a whole other topic. But how can the current generation really check their egos at the door and determine, well, is this a business worth passing on to the next generation in the first place?
Yeah, whenever I work with families, one variable that always has to be on the table is the best decision for this business and for this family to either let it die or to sell it.
Wow.
We make an assumption that passing it on is the best option. It is a option. It may not be the best option. What I have seen, so I did my master's from Pepperdine specifically within family business dynamic and family business transition. And in my thesis, one of the things that became very evident to me as I was interviewing a plethora of different business owners that had a family member successor option inside their company was, if I want somebody to be my successor, son, daughter, son-in-law, fill in the blank, whoever that person might be, if they do not have the ability to say no, then their yes doesn't mean anything either. So if I am passing this business down to my son because I assume that's what he wants, but he does not feel like he could say, Dad, I don't want to run this, and Dad actually hear that, then his other answer is irrelevant because he only felt like he had one option choice. Whenever that happens, all we've done is we have kicked the can down the road of a potential family split, a family dysfunction, and typically a business dysfunction. It is not going to be an immediate response. It's normally about 3 to 7 years down the road, depending upon market conditions, depending upon size. But when somebody feels like they do not have another choice but to say, yeah, I guess I'll take it, it is setting up a dynamic that is going to lead to a family dynamic that few people want, but it happens a lot because they think, well, this is what we have to do. This is what it means to be a good member of this family. This is what it means to respect my father, or I want to try to impress my father-in-law, so that's what I have to do. But it rarely leads to a good, healthy dynamic within the family.
And Bryan, as you're talking about that, what's interesting when you think this through, big picture-wise, if you were to ask, well, what's the outcome? And the answer usually is, we want the next generation to have a lifestyle, a comfort level, something productive, something that they can do. And we'll forget about the means to the ends and how we do that. And to your point, well, maybe the best way to do that is to sell the business, because it's not really a sustainable business, or go through the family split or the fights or all those other kinds of things. So points well taken there. So once you get beyond that, Tell me what really big picture wise, the kinds of dynamics that you're working in, because as our listeners heard in the official introduction, you are a traveled person. Over 45 countries you've been to. You have really an incredible insight into world culture, human dynamics, and what's going on out there. So big picture wise, is it Pareto's Law that's going on here, Bryan, where 80% of the issues that you're seeing in family businesses are coming down to, call it give or take, 20% of the same root causes?
Yeah, I mean, in almost every family dynamic, there is some sibling, some cousin that has gone off the rails in some way. They have a drug addiction, they've had failed marriages, they have had inability to kind of find their footing, and certain aspects within the family will revolve around how do we help take care or how do we help bring that person back in to a family dynamic. I see that issue quite a bit. I also see the fact of if you've watched Succession or any of those pieces where you have multiple siblings that are all trying to vie for the same position. And so there can only be one CEO. And so I feel like if me as the firstborn male am entitled to that, yet my sister is equally or maybe more qualified, how does dad make that decision? What does that look like? Most of the time, what I have seen, especially businesses that are run or founded by men, if they are still married to the first wife or the woman who is the mother of the children, normally she wants family continuity while the dad wants business success. And those are not exclusive, and that is a stereotype, but I normally see that dynamic to where, especially once grandkids are involved, it's how do we keep the people together where they will want to be in a conversation. They'll want to come over for Thanksgiving. They'll want to have the ability to be in each other's lives. And those aspects about how we interact as a family, and you overlay that with what the business needs, those become sources of conflict. And I've got your basic 3 to 5 spots. And one of the things that comes up a lot is unresolved issues that have been a recurring narrative since childhood. So siblings that have the same fighting patterns, the same frustrations, or the same dynamic with a parent that they've had for 20 or 30 years, and it's just manifesting itself differently at this age and at this life stage. But oftentimes, whenever I look at that transition from one generation to the next, the spot that so few people think about is just because the business has succeeded up to this point has no bearing on its ability to continue to succeed moving forward. And so I spend a lot of my work, and my team spends a lot of time working on, okay, so we can navigate the legal, the tax aspects of a generational transfer of all of those elements. But what is the fundamental strategy of the business moving forward? And oftentimes it needs a fairly robust disruption of itself in order to be relevant for the next decade or the next 2 decades, because the outgoing generation tended to reduce the risk and not want to unnecessarily take on risk as they are trying to exit. But the incoming generation sees, I need this to work for 30 years. And so what do we need to do to reinvent and disrupt? And that becomes a tension point because new generation comes in and starts making changes, and outgoing generation can feel like, oh, so you thought I didn't know what I was doing. You have to come in and change everything. And so it can be seen as a sign of disrespect. Or it can be seen as a sign of you're trying to come in and take out all this knowledge that I used to have. Because oftentimes, especially if you've got a 50, 100, 200 person or more company, if I have a ownership transition, the other senior leaders are normally not far behind in age. They're normally a 5 to 10 year age gap. And so you could have an entire changeover or a 70% changeover of a leadership team within a 3 to 5 year time period. And so it can feel like the company loses its roots if you don't have good core values, principles, understandings, but also realizing that those roots are meant to adapt based upon the market, and that just because you did that in the 80s doesn't mean that's what you need to do in 2030. How can I use those same principles and values to be able to interact with this market instead of saying, well, that's how we have always done it, so we have to keep doing it that exact same way over and over again.
And so, Bryan, when you're brought in early enough, and I suspect that's probably, unfortunately, not the majority of the time, but if you're brought in early enough, how do you head that off at the pass that you actually don't have to go through that? What kinds of things or systems, strategies are you putting in place?
Ideally, we would have about a 3 to 5 year time horizon where a transition is known. Everybody is aware of that, but we may not have a set date yet, but we're working towards it. So if we have a 3 to 5 year time horizon, we can assess what are the skill sets of the desired recipients of that baton. What are their current competencies? What do they need to grow in? both for the current operations of the business, but also where it needs to go. Do we have that amount of runway? Do we have that time? That is an ideal scenario because we can work through a lot of those family dynamics. We can help anticipate potential pain points before they become an issue. I also want to have a deep understanding of how does the family deal with conflict. Some families, they yell and scream and they get it all out there. Others, they look very peaceful on the surface, but they have a lot of hidden issues under the surface that you've really got to unpack that are really driving a lot of those actions. So that 3 to 5 year time horizon is ideal. Far too often we get brought in a crisis.
Exactly.
Hey, I want to transition in 6 months, or hey, I've tried this and it's been a complete mess. Can you help me clean this up? Or business has lost 30% of its value in the last 6 months because I handed it over to my son-in-law and he wasn't actually competent, but I don't want to take him out because I'm afraid of how that's going to impact my relationship with my daughter, and she's got a baby on the way. And so you get all of those very real family scenarios that happen. In a crisis, we can be very valuable. We can be very helpful. And not every transition is a family dynamic issue. Sometimes founder had a heart attack or they had an accident. They mentally are incapacitated because of a stroke or something else. That's a different type of scenario than an internal family fight or an internal board feud or anything along those lines. The actions may still be the same. You have chaos, you have uncertainty, you have lack of clarity about what needs to happen. You may have a cash flow issue, but the actions for each of those are very different because we're working from different starting points.
So, Bryan, for the listener who is saying, Bryan, I wish I knew you 3 years ago because that's exactly where I am today. And obviously I didn't know you and we just went face forward into this chaotic crisis of a situation. What do you do today? So if you're brought into this situation where it's happening in real time, it's failed, everyone's at their wits' end, what can we do?
I always ask people to start with, what are you trying to create? Are you trying to create a scenario that has cash flow certainty? Are you trying to create a scenario that has family unity? Are you trying to create a situation that has business opportunity for the future? What is your driving force behind these actions? Because some people, especially founders, will say for years that they want somebody to take over their business. They have the best of intentions in that. But whenever it actually comes down to it, they don't want to leave. They want to stay. And so I always have to ask a little bit of a question of, how are you contributing to the problem that you're complaining about? So if you are in a situation that you do not like, time for some honesty, some self-reflection. How are you contributing to that problem? Are you bringing people in, asking them to lead, and then undermining when they actually try to do that? Are you unable to attract the type of talent that you want? Are you making excuses for people that never should have been in those positions that they didn't have that last name or that blood in their veins, or they didn't marry in at the right time? And sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is to not put them in charge. The absolute best thing for them as a family unit and for the company.
Let's talk about that. And all too often it's the case where perhaps mom started it, or mom's father started it, or dad started it, or dad's father started, whatever the case may be. And they have the kids, and now you're on to the second generation or the third generation. The family's getting larger, and you have daughter-in-laws, son-in-laws who are coming onto the scene. And you do have that political pressure and parents wanting to do what they feel is right for the kids. Well, I want my son or my daughter to have a good livelihood, so I will put so-and-so into the business who's a non-family member, who's a family member now by marriage, where maybe on paper it seems like the right thing to do, but it really isn't. But they don't want to succumb to all those pressures. So how do you deal with that? How do you have that kind of conversation? Or do you have that conversation? Is this where you bring in someone like yourself, you can fall on the sword and do the work on behalf of the family to protect the business?
Yeah. So in those scenarios, there's two sides of it. One, we're making an assumption that the person in that position actually wants to be in that position. I see just as frequently that a person has been put in that spot because they felt like it was an obligation or a duty. They were not actually wanting that spot, but they were asked to do it and they felt like they had no choice but to say yes. So going back to if I can't say no, then my yes doesn't mean anything either. There's an element of that. The other part is somebody who is actively campaigning to try to be in that position. That is always a red flag. Anytime that someone is actively campaigning to be in a leadership role, especially if it comes with a substantial amount of money or a lifestyle shift, for them. That does not mean they're immediately incompetent, but it gives me a lot of concerns that I want to do due diligence about to be able to understand why are they so interested in this position. So one thing that I've discovered is some people are driven out of a desire or a pursuit of prestige, the feeling of being important. So if I am CEO, if I'm president, if I'm in charge, I feel better about myself. And I also like the perks that come along with it. I'm externally viewed by customers, by vendors, by other people in the community as you are in charge, you're making big decisions. Other people are driven by, I want to actually create a team. I want to create an environment that people want to be a part of. I want to work with people who are trying to create a better solution for us all. I am more interested in the motivating factors behind a CEO choice or a board member choice than I am about the actual choice itself.
Okay.
Because what that person is driven by or is directed by, it will create a subculture within the company, and the company will start to shift its actions to help reward or to help supplement that desire of that individual or a few key people that are there. Because if the drive is on prestige, we will do everything we can to make sure we keep this front up. We will never show that we have any weakness. We will never look at anything else because we want to portray this image of we have everything together. We're a high-end firm, fill in the blank, whatever that might be. And you may actually miss out on market shifts or opportunities because you feel like, well, that's beneath us, or that's not something that I would want to do, whenever that may actually be the best strategy for the business. So there's never a perfect fit for any leadership spot. There's always deficiencies. There's always pros and cons that you can go and nitpick around. But I want to know, can a person in this role be able to deal with curveballs? Can they deal with ambiguity? Can they deal with uncertainty? Because being in a leadership position, especially in a family business, what you are saying is you are asking for more uncertainty, not less. That's what the role requires. That's what it functions as, because it's not just uncertainty about market, it's uncertainty about family dynamics. Because whatever that person's role is within the family, it has a different connotation whenever you may be the person who could fire certain family members from their livelihoods. And what we haven't gotten into yet, the way that companies are structured legally. Is this managed by a trust? Is this managed by a board? Does the board have the ability to hire and fire this CEO? Does the trust give certain language or protections? Because I've worked with clients where the trust says these family members are required to be employed by this company indefinitely. Well, that's a very different context. If I, as a CEO, cannot fire or remove or transition somebody because the way that their trust is set up, it is a legal requirement for those are all different scenarios that I've ran across, and there is no one size fits all. And so I want to understand, how are these decisions made? Because I can play almost any game, but I need to understand what the rules are. What are the rules? What are the contexts? And then who has certain advantages or certain disadvantages because of how those rules have been structured or set in place.
What's interesting, Bryan, in that first scenario where it's all about prestige or ego or vanity, whatever you want to call it, fill in the blank, it really sounds like it's a situation, it's that old fable of the emperor with no clothes. That's what the organization ultimately becomes. And they're playing up to that because, let's face it, the employees in the company, they're worried about their jobs. I have to meet the rent or the mortgage. I have to put food on the table. And okay, this person wants prestige. If that's what it's about, that's what I'll give them. That's my job security. I'll go ahead and do that. So in those kinds of scenarios, Bryan, is there ever a situation where you're advising a family, listen, why not just cut a check to so-and-so? If you want a livelihood, if you want a lifestyle for someone, if the business can afford it, just cut a check and have professional management come in and just call it a day. And this way, your sons, your daughters, your family, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they'll have that livelihood and they can figure out what they want to do with their lives. Is that ever an option?
It happens about 2 to 3 times a year with clients I work with. Because the absolute best thing for the family is to not be working together and to have that separation. Because if the business truly is kind of the goose that's laying the golden egg, we don't want to mess that up. And it is cheaper for the family and the business to pay an eternal severance or an annuity to that individual and to have them not involved than to have them mess up everything else for hundreds, thousands of employees that may be connected to that.
And then, Bryan, on the flip side, so that takes care of, perhaps not in the most humble of ways, but that takes care of the situation. Well, I want a lifestyle for my child or my grandchild or a family member, and this way we can do it without affecting the business. The one caveat being, obviously, as long as the business is in a position to continue to write the check, things are good. the flip side, someone who does have the right intention. Yeah, I want to take this to the next level. I want to build a team. I want to create a legacy for the company for the better. All the right reasons. But as terrific as a person as he or she may be, they either don't have the experience, they don't have the skill set, they don't have the aptitude. How do you handle that kind of situation?
So it depends on if they have a skill set that can be developed, or if they are aspiring for something that no matter how much they work is never going to be part of their competency or skill set. So you split it up in kind of those two spots. If this is somebody that is just, they're green and they need some experience and some veteran assistance around them, let's figure a way to be able to do that on a set time frame. So here's milestones, here's objectives. We need to see this progression, this direction to be able to move up to this spot or within this context. And so that's where I go back to, if I have 3 to 5 years with a family to be able to work through, those scenarios are very common. We've got Johnny over here who's 26 and he just finished his MBA and he's really bright. He just doesn't have the real world experience that we would like for this. Can we help be able to get it? Because we want him to be the one in charge of this by the time he's 35, fill in the blank, whatever number, age, year, whatever that might be. That is a different connotation than somebody who has great desires, but that's just not who they are. That's not their wiring, and no amount of support skill set is going to get them to that level. Those situations are probably the hardest ones that I deal with, because there are times whenever you see the limitations of somebody's capabilities, and just because I may see that does not mean I'm 100% right. There have been people that I have thought that about that have surprised me on the positive side and on the negative side. But if we feel like that is a true limitation, how can we find the best fit for that individual? And how can they be a contributor as part of a team instead of maybe being the one who is leading everything in that team? And once again, we go back to the size of company. Some companies are so large, you can create many kind of fiefdoms, divisions, territories within it, where somebody might be good at leading a subset, but they're never going to be good at leading the entirety of it. And so how do we find the best way for this to work? Not only for the family, but also the other people, because every business that's a family business, you're going to have non-family members working in it. How do we find a way that's appropriate and right for them? Because I feel just as much of a responsibility to help take care of them and their families and their hard work as I do the core family or the core families who are put together.
Got it. Okay. And so in that kind of scenario, and actually in all the scenarios, as I'm thinking through this, Bryan, and you can tell me if I'm on base or off base, these are at the best of times prickly conversations. These are not easy conversations. And so I'm thinking of the listener out there who's saying, okay, Bryan, you sound pretty good, but should I write the check to have someone like Bryan come in for the company? I would think one of the biggest reasons, if you want to keep your family intact, if you don't want to be on the firing squad from some family members, that someone like yourself, you're the insulator, you're the outside party. You don't have to deal with those family dynamics at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever the family occasion may be. You can be the bearer of bad news, not the family or the family member. How much does that play into this equation?
There's a part of that. Every now and then I will get somebody who a year into an engagement will say, we brought you in as an insurance policy. We brought you in so that we would have somebody to be able to deflect to in case things did not go well. And my perspective on that is like, that's fine. But the reason why you brought me in is not as important to me as are you willing to actually have the hard conversations necessary in order to move this along? So that's a very early qualifying question that I will ask of potential clients is, I am never going to cause you unnecessary pain. That is not my desire. I don't get joy out of causing unnecessary pain. But if we go through this, there will be hard conversations. There will be things that will be frustrating. There will be times where you are mad at me or you are mad at other people because we are bringing up topics that need to be discussed in order for it to have the framework necessary for this to be able to move forward. If you're unwilling to do that work, bringing me in is not going to help because I can't force you to go there. I can create every scenario, every situation where it would be in your best interest to move forward on that conversation, but I cannot force you into that and force everybody else. So I work a lot with families at the early stages of how do we create the trust in our dynamic so that my desire is to help you collectively work together. And I'm also always trying to work myself out of a job. If a family needs me 10 years after the fact, that is not a good setup. I want them to be able to have the competencies, them to be able to have the structures to be able to work together and not need a third party to come in. Now, there may be certain situations or certain issues that come up where I might need to be brought back in. But my desire is not to be working with a family for 20 years. That's not a ideal scenario. It's how do I get you to where you are self-sufficient to be able to do that?
It sounds like you're a lot like us here at Deep Wealth. Our goal is effectively to fire ourselves, teach the fisher person how to fish, that they can do it on their own.
Yeah.
And for the listeners out there who are either starting a business that may become a family business or they're in a family business, perhaps you can shed some insight on this, because I know oftentimes when I'm speaking with a family business, there's almost a baked-in assumption. They've drunk the Kool-Aid that, yes, this business is going to last forever, and hopefully 6, 7 generations down the road, the business will still be around. Not taking into account that as you go from one generation to the next generation, exponentially, it's growing in terms of family members. So as an example, first generation, perhaps there were a family of the 2 parents and maybe 2 kids or 3 kids. Well, each of those kids, they have kids. And you see where this goes very quickly. Mathematically, it almost becomes unsustainable unless they become a titan of business and they have thousands of employees and you can incorporate that. How do you deal with that kind of scenario in terms of mindset when you're working with a family?
Within family businesses, we do have this, I would call it a myth or a misconception that family businesses are meant to last for long periods of time. Most companies, family business or non-family businesses, are not going to make it past a 20, maybe 25-year mark. Merger, acquisition, closure, bankruptcy, something. If you have a business that lasts 50 years, you are in the single digits of success rate by that metric. Just because a business lasts for a long period of time does not mean it was successful. It may have been limping along and barely breaking even for a number of years, and it should have died years before. So if our metric is we want to keep the business open at all costs, that metric can cause you to make unnecessary sacrifices and other things in order to be able to have that metric be successful. Keeping a business alive to be able to pass down to future generations, I understand the sentiment and the desire. And if that truly is important to you, I'd love to be able to help make that happen. But I am more interested in how do you pass down the values, the perspective, and the skill set, because sometimes the best thing for a family business is to inspire entrepreneurship in the next generation for them to go start something rather than to step in as managers of the existing enterprise or the existing core piece. And so that's a spot where I want to understand from the grandparents, from the parents, what does success look like for you as it relates to your kids, your grandkids, and how they explore their ideas, their curiosities, because sometimes you can use the core family enterprise as a great launching pad for other endeavors that are in a similar vein, in a vertical integration element, something along those lines, but it does not have to be directly tied to what that core legacy business may be.
So Bryan, let's talk about that, because really I love what I'm hearing you say. In essence, you're turning that family business, which sometimes when you think of a family business, they're kind of behind the times, they're old, they're stuck in how things it used to be, and you're turning it into an incubator where family members, they can leverage the resources from the family business, go off and start their own businesses and see where that goes. Because I know what you and the team do, and we're talking about this offline, you're really breaking the mold of people's beliefs out there of what a family business is and what family businesses should and shouldn't do. So what are you guys doing out there? Where are you going? What are you seeing where most family businesses are saying, I can't do it, not possible, or never even thought of that? What would that look like?
So most of the time what I see is whoever the founder or the current CEO, president of a family business is, they are judging the next generation based on the criteria that they used to become successful. And so they will look at it and say, well, I was able to do this because I worked hard in 1975 and I was able to build it to this. And I'm frustrated that you aren't working the same way in order to create this, or it's not the same type of dynamic whenever it is different generations, different capital structures, different everything is a difference in that. And so the families that are able, especially the larger the family, the more you have to think about that core business as kind of an incubator, because otherwise the business just functionally has to be fairly large to be able to create the employment opportunities with the skill sets, with the specialization for all of those family members to still be involved at some point. Or you start taking a family member who is a C- position and put them into a role whenever you could have had an A+ player in that, but because they didn't have the right last name, they got bumped for this. And you start allowing mediocrity to exist because you're trying to maintain a belief that family working here is a high priority or is a high driver for this institution.
So, Bryan, you can tell me if I'm on base or off base with this, because as we've been talking through this, what I'm hearing you say loud and clear, I really love your approach. And it's more on what I would call mindset. Yeah. That you and your team, you have the ability through mindset to train the existing generation who's running the business. Hey, don't assume anything. Let's take a look at what you have. Where's the business today? Who the family members are? Maybe some family members you can act like an incubator because they're really entrepreneurial. You don't want to hold them back and tie them into the family business. And you can encourage them to create a market disruption in an entirely different area on their own and go do their own things. Or maybe you now have the mindset, well, I know politically, or it's the right thing to do, supposedly, I should put my daughter-in-law, my son-in-law in the business, but you know what? Let's just cut a check and we'll have a professional management team. Or a mindset of, hey, you know what? So-and-so, still young, but wow, they have a lot of potential. This is exactly the kind of leadership that this company needs in the next decade or so. Let's begin to mentor that person. They have the aptitude, they have the background, the skill set, and all those kinds of things. How am I doing with that? Is that more or less how you can come in and really make a difference?
Yeah, it's definitely one way to come in. And what I've actually done a few times is I have bought businesses from clients that had poor successor options, where they may have had some of those pieces in place, but there was a void in top level leadership, or there was an issue that made it to where staying entirely within the family was not in the best interest of that family. So that was never part of my strategy or my team strategy, but we've now done that successfully 3 times to be able to come in and buy businesses from clients or to partner with them in the continued progress and succession of it. And it's been some of the most fun I've had working with clients because you're able to pull the actual strengths of the individuals behind a shared vision and a shared perspective, especially whenever you have an industry that has a lot of institutional knowledge or a deep learning curve to be able to understand how that industry functions or that geographical area functions. And so that's one of the parts that I really enjoy is how can we find ways to be able to partner, not just on, most people look at scenarios and they feel like they have option A or option B. Whenever I work with clients, we got 25 different options. We've got a lot of different spots. Now, 15 of these may immediately be off the table because they just don't make sense. But I want to lay out all of those options. And obviously, the more family members, the more variables, the greater those options become. But how can we find unique and creative ways to meet that end objective and not just feel like we have a hammer so everything looks like a nail, but how do we find the solution that's best for the family, for the business, and looking at bringing in external equity, selling the business, bringing in external management, developing internal management. All of those things need to be on the table for consideration so that we can make the best choice because we actually considered all the options, not because we only looked at 2 because we felt like those are the only 2 available.
And Bryan, when you're brought into a particular family business, as we like to say here at Deep Wealth, particularly with our 9-step roadmap, and you're thinking at one point having a liquidity event, we always ask that rhetorical question, how can you master something you've never done before? Yep. And the answer is, well, of course you can't. And if you try to, well, you're putting everything at risk, your financial freedom, your future, the business, all those other things. But what's really nice, someone like yourself, you are across the country, really around the world in different situations. That gives you the edge and you're seeing all kinds of different things. And because of that wide perspective, you may see something that other people simply don't, and you have that broad experience.
Well, and it's so fun. I mean, we operate in Mexico, we operate in multiple other countries. And what I have noticed is a solution that I may offer to somebody in Ohio, for example, is not a good solution, even for the same dynamics in another country because of the cultural norms or because of the legal limitations or because of different spots that are there. And what I always tell people, especially whenever they're looking at a transition event, is think about the first time you bought a car or the first time you bought a house. You didn't know what you didn't know. Exactly. You probably got better with each successive purchase because you learned things from your previous interactions. So if you're looking at selling a business or transitioning a business, how do we bring in expertise so that you don't make that same mistake that you may have bought the first time you bought a house or the first time you bought a car by overpaid? I didn't ask these questions. I got too antsy and I didn't have the objective perspective that I want. And so that's why I enjoy working with clients of selling or transitioning a business may be the largest financial event that you ever have in your life? How do we make sure that you have the least amount of regret possible?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always very honest to say, you will have some level of regret.
Mm-hmm.
I have never met somebody who has sold a business that 5 years later says, I did it 100% exactly like I want. There's
Mm-hmm.
always some point, or I wish I had done this, or this could have been a little different. Same thing, it's the buyer's remorse. Those psychological pieces are true. But how can we have the least amount of regret? And especially as you have more people sitting around the table, how do we have the collective feeling of, I'm glad we did this.
Mm-hmm.
This was a good decision. This is what we needed to do. And again, there is never a perfect time to sell a business.
Mm-hmm.
There's never a perfect time to be able to transition. But I like to use the analogy of a baton.
Mm-hmm.
If I am trying to sell a business or pass it on to a future generation, there is a window in which somebody would be willing to hold or grab that baton from me.
Mm-hmm.
If I am unable to make that handoff, that window may expire and there's no guarantee that it will ever come back around.
Sure.
And so I've worked with people who have made promises to employees or family members. I'm going to step away in 3 years, in 5 years. 3 years comes, they're still there. 5 years, they're still there.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, that person, they stop showing up. They leave. They go to a different job. They go start a competitor because they do not believe you whenever you say that they could actually be a successor candidate. And I've had multiple clients that family members have left because granddad said, you're going to take this over. 8 years later, you're no closer to that than what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates odd dynamics. And so if we're going to look at a transition event, we have to understand there is a window. Mm-hmm. That window will expire. But that window of a successor may not line up with your window of how long you want to work or how long you want to be in charge. And so you can have a disconnect of those. So how do we find ways to be able to navigate that process?
And speaking of navigation, just before we go into wrap-up mode, I'm wondering, as we sit here today recording this conversation, two significant things have happened. And I've been asking these two questions. There's a bit of a theme going on out there with the guests, always to hear their perspective. And so as we sit here right now, thankfully, the pandemic is well behind us, but it left its imprint on society. Things are never the same and they forever change. Some good, some perhaps not so good. We'll leave the judgment off to the side. Things are just different. And then on top of that, Bryan, AI, it's everywhere now. It started many years ago, decades ago, and then really it seems out of nowhere, it's headlines and every day we're hearing something else, and massive change is now coming because of AI. So from a family dynamic, a family business side of things, post-COVID, and now with AI upon us, how have things changed or haven't they changed when we're running a family business?
Well, I have a unique perspective on this. About 6 years ago, I bought a technology company that was about 2 weeks away from bankruptcy. Now we're about 70 employees and we specialize in AI and machine learning, working with large corporations. And I do not have any direct involvement in day-to-day operations. I have great business partners that are there, but I love my conversations with them about where AI is and where it is progressing, because hearing that from the developers, from the technologist perspective, they are always further along in the thought process of what it could do or what it is capable of than what I realized at the time. And so within family dynamics, family relationships and the interpersonal emotional elements is not going to be replaced by AI because humans, we need a way to be able to interact with each other. AI is another tool that can be used for good, can be used for bad, depending upon the company, the situation, the dynamic that you're in. I view AI similar to how people view the internet. Whenever it was first coming on the screen, it's like, well, I don't really know what this is. How can I use it? Where does it make sense? AI, there's certain industries that it's deeply involved in right now and has ability to take your cost factor down by magnitudes to be able to make efficiency so much better. AI, the ability to put things through that code base or to be able to look at large data sets, to be able to find synergies or to be able to find common threads or to be able to find elements like that. For some industries, that's a legitimate game changer. It could replace positions. It can drastically reduce expenses. And so what I always encourage people with AI, experiment, like find ways to be able to get comfortable with it. It's not going away. But how can you find a use case or a scenario where you can run an experiment in your company to be able to see, well, could this be helpful here? Is this worth it? Because it's probably going to be clunky at first. I doubt that you're going to have an AI deployment as a tool within your company and say, well, that just worked fantastic the first time. It may, but let's be realistic. So how can we find ways to be able to run experiments and not be scared of it, but utilize it, because it may be part of the innovation that we've talked about of where that business needs to go in order to be relevant for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Some terrific insights on that. And we'll have to see where that goes. As we're saying here at Deep Wealth, really, we feel we're in the golden era of AI. It's just starting right now. So we'll see where all that goes. Brian, before we go into wrap-up mode, I'm wondering, are there perhaps topics that we didn't cover in our what seems like a very short time together, although we've covered a lot? Are there some things that we haven't covered? Is there a message or some insights that you'd like to get out there to the listeners?
One of the biggest ones is just where the future of work is going. Hybrid work is here to stay. It is not going away. If you are in an industry or a business that still requires your employees to come into an office 5 days a week and you're looking at a generational transfer, you've already cut your pool of potential candidates so far down that your possibility of success is near impossible. Now, I understand there are certain industries that's required to have them there. Manufacturing companies, machine shops, other things that are producing physical goods. That's different than if you're doing a knowledge work or something that can be done behind a screen. But if you're using that as a filtering tool to eliminate certain buyers, or looking at that as they need to run the business the same way that you've operated it, you have cut your pool of potential successors so far down that it's going to make your process that may already be difficult even more so, and it's probably going to leave you more frustrated than what you need to be.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And speaking of that, as we look forward, we look back, it's a perfect segue to the wrap-up question. And I say this on every episode, but it's so true. I really have the privilege and the honor to ask this question. It's become a tradition here. So Brian, let me set this up for you. It's a fun question. I'd like you to think about the movie Back to the Future. And in the movie, you have that magical DeLorean car that can take you to any point in time. So I want you to imagine now, it's tomorrow morning. And Brian, this is the fun part. You look outside your window, not only is the DeLorean car there, but the door is open, it's curbside, it's waiting for you to hop on in, which you do. You can now go to any point in your life. Brian, as a young child, a teenager, whatever point in time that would be. So you do that, you go back in time. Brian, what are you telling your younger self in terms of life lessons or life wisdom? Or, hey, Brian, do this, but don't do that. What would that sound like?
A great question. I would probably go back to whenever I'm 13, 14, 15, working deeply in our family business, and ideally right before we had to declare bankruptcy, which was whenever I was a freshman in high school. And then I got the privilege, honor, responsibility, whatever you want to call it, of leading my family's company through bankruptcy because my dad was not in the country at the time, and I got to proceed through a lot of that. And in that moment, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Like I had to let go about 35 employees, some of which were parents of friends of mine. If there's one thing that's worse than getting fired, it's being fired by a 15-year-old whenever you're an adult. And then I think I would go back to that time to be able to help myself understand how that experience would shape the way that I view risk and the way that I view how businesses operate, but more importantly, how I view people. As far as these are not widgets, these are not cogs in a system to be able to produce an output. They have their own individual desires, demands, hopes for their life. And how can I create structures that allow them to be able to do that? Because when you allow that for other people to be able to live their best version of your life, you're able to create some amazing things beyond just from a profit standpoint, but from a lifestyle and a enjoyment to be able to interact with people on a daily basis.
Wow, that is really insightful advice. And not just for your 15-year-old, but really for all of us today, whether you're 15 or 150, everything else in between, that can take you places. Brian, I really want to thank you for your wisdom, your vulnerability, your insights. You really made a difference out there. And as we say here at Deep Wealth, it's official. This episode is a wrap. And as always, may you continue to thrive and prosper while you remain healthy and safe. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
The Deep Wealth experience was definitely a game changer for me.
This course is one of the best investments you will ever make because you will get an ROI of 100 times that. Anybody who doesn't go through it will lose millions.
If you don't have time for this program, you'll never have time for a successful liquidity.
I mean, it was the best value of any business course I've ever taken. The money was very well spent.
Compared to when we first began, today I feel better prepared, but in some respects, maybe less prepared, not because of the course, but because the course brought to light so many things that I thought we were on top of that we need to fix.
I 100% believe there's never a great time for a business owner to allocate extra hours into his or her week or day. So it's an investment that will yield results today. I thought I will reap the benefit of this program in 3 to 5 years down the road. But as soon as I stepped forward into the program, my mind changed immediately.
There was so much value in the experience that the time I invested paid back so much for the energy that was expended.
The Deep Wealth experience compared to other programs is the top. What we learned is very practical. Sometimes you learn stuff that is great to learn, but you never use it. The stuff we learned from Deep Wealth experience, I believe it's going to benefit us both.
I've done an executive MBA. I've worked for billion-dollar companies before. I've worked for smaller companies before I started my business. I've been running my business successfully now for getting close to a decade. We're on a growth trajectory. Reflecting back on the Deep Wealth, I knew less than 10% what I know now. Maybe close to 1% even.
Hands down the best program in which I've ever participated. And we've done a lot of different things over the years. We've been in other mastermind groups, gone to many seminars, workshops, conferences, retreats, read books. This was so different. I haven't had an experience that's anything close to this in all the years that we've been at this. It's 5-star, A+.
I would highly recommend it to any super busy business owner out there. And Deep Wealth is an accurate name for it. This program leads to deeper wealth and happier wealth, not just deeper wealth. I don't think there's a dollar value that could be associated with such an experience and knowledge that could be applied today and forever.
Are you leaving millions on the table? Please visit www.deepwealth.com/success to learn more. If you're not on my email list, you'll want to be. Sign up at www.deepwealth.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, if it added value, if you walked away with some new insights and strategies, please leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Reviews help us reach new listeners, grow the show, and continue to create content that you'll enjoy. And as we wrap up this episode, as always, please stay healthy and safe.